Hello all and welcome to the GMAT Advanced Target 700 program by Career Karta. Today we are going to the 7th installment of all the videos that are in the series for the verbal part. Now this part 7 is in continuation with part 6. So those of you who have not seen part 6, I would suggest that you quickly go and run through the part 6 of the whole series because we will see the questions that are in continuation to the questions that we had discussed in part 6. To go, if you also want to get a detailed read of the passage, you should go back to the video and read it at your own pace, so that you are able to understand, correlate, and corroborate with whatever I have been trying to say and my own understanding of the passage. To give you a quick recap of the passage, we were looking at this particular passage. It says Adam Smith, a Scottish professor of moral philosophy, is often identified as the father of modern capitalism. He published Wealth of Nations in 1776, which is widely believed to have laid the foundation work of modern economics. However, many believe that this is not a book on economics. Its subject is political economy, and it was aimed at governments that were subsidizing and protecting their merchants, their farmers, their manufacturers. The role of the free market and the laissez-faire structures that support it are two components of a larger theory of human interaction and social history as proposed by Smith, though he never used these terms. Okay, he never used this particular term. However, his philosophy bears little resemblance to the libertarian caricature put forth by proponents of laissez-faire markets, who describe humans solely as homo economicus. For Smith, the market is a mechanism of morality and social support. He postulated that free, unregulated competition converts the private interests and passions of men into consequences most agreeable to the interests of the whole society. As if by an invisible hand, and despite the intentions of rapacious landlords, greedy merchants, mendacious traders, ruthless profiteers, the best guarantors of men's welfare and the rock on which rests man's freedom is the profit system. Okay, so he's saying if the profit system is there, it will in some way also allow for human freedom. Smith even offered the startling judgment that Britain's colonies and slave labor were more of an economic disadvantage than asset. Why? Probably because if they were set free, they would probably be more productive human beings as opposed to them being used as slaves. Smith also asks his readers to reconsider the meaning of wealth itself. Is wealth the money and assets that one has at any given point in time, or is it these things combined with the potential to have more, to adjust to circumstances, and to cultivate the skills to increase such potential? His overarching concern in the Wealth of Nations is the creation of universal opulence, which extends itself to the lowest ranks of people. So this was a quick recap of the passage, so that you kind of, if you are probably seeing this video in continuation, but you are seeing the 7th part almost after some time after you saw the 6th part, it will kind of help you refresh your memory. Okay, we had done 2 questions earlier. Now we are going to look at the 3rd question. Okay, it says it can be inferred that the creation of universal opulence, which extends itself to the lowest ranks of the people, would lead to which of the following? All right, this is a structure that Adam Smith thinks that we should be aiming at. Sorry. Okay. Right. So he says his overarching concern in the Wealth of Nations, the book that he wrote, is the creation of universal opulence, which extends itself to the lowest ranks of people. Okay. So essentially, this is what he wants to achieve. This is his utopia. This is Adam Smith's utopic concept. Let's look at the option. It will lend more authority to the moneyed segments of the society. Okay, as I said, this is utopia. So you cannot have more authority to one segment. Okay, universal. Mark the word universal. Universal implies okay. If you look at the exact meaning of the word, it means to the whole universe, which essentially means in regular context, it means to all. Okay, and not to some. Okay, hence option A gets out. Let's look at option B. It says it will create a commercial system that betters the lives of the worst off in society. This is very, very close to what the statement is saying. The word universal gives us a hint that it will lead to a distributed opulence. Okay, we have just seen. Similarly, if it extends to the lowest ranks of people, it will create a commercial system that betters the life for the worst off in society. Right? The lowest ranks of people are probably the worst off in an economic system, right? Hence, it is safe to assume that it will create a commercial system that betters the lives of worst off in society. This is a very, very easy option. This is a very easy question also in general. Okay. Let's look at the next option. It says it will rid the society of all forms of self-interest. Will it? Think about it. I'll give you some time to basically think about option C. Okay, if you need more time, you can pause the video and do it at your own pace. Now, if you look at the passage supports the role of self-interest. Okay, this is promoted. Adam Smith says that this is what is the most important thing that is keeping us going. Private interests and passions of men. Okay, this turns it into consequences most agreeable to the interests of the whole society. And private interest is a good thing. However, is it any way saying that it will get the society of all, it will rid the society of all forms of self-interest? No. In fact, Smith believes that the best guarantor of men's welfare and the rock on which rests man's freedom is the profit system. Right? Or you can think of the universal opulence as a product of the self-interest. Okay? But the belief that it will rid the society of self-interest is the primary point of contention. Okay, probably we can say that this phrase, it points to this, but nothing points to this. Okay, hence it goes out. It will lead to freedom from bondage for all the slave labor in society. Well, no. So this is kind of like a option that will confuse people who have not read the passage with any depth. Okay, leading to freedom from bondage for all slave labor in society. This is somewhere which is not discussed. Okay. Adam Smith just says that slave labor would be more productive if it is left free. He is not making a case for all the slave labor in society being bondage free. Probably he wants that, but the passage does not cover it in its scope. It will lead to political stability in the nations that achieve it. See, it might. Okay, but the thing is, it is very far-fetched. No information has been presented in the passage that connects political stability with universal opulence. Okay, so this correlation does not have any ground. All right, this also becomes a wrong option. As I said, it might. These two options were might options, but not enough information in the passage. Now, the crucial learning from these is that you will have a lot of options where you will have far-fetched options. Those options could probably be right, but they require a very, very strong stretch of imagination. Generally, these are not right. Generally, probably there are, if let us say there is no other close option, then you might think that one option which is probably right, because every other option is not falling into, you're solving a question by elimination. Probably you can go with the option like this, but in most circumstances they will be not right. Okay, so generally some things have to be logically concluded from whatever has been given in the passage for it to be a right answer. Let's move on to the next question. It says Smith believes that slave labor were more of an economic disadvantage than asset, primarily because, okay, he believes that they will be more productive when set free. Very, very probable answer. He's talking about you know, the whole idea here, right? Yeah. Okay. The best guarantors of men's welfare is man's freedom. What will man do when he is free? His private interests will convert his passion into consequences most agreeable to the interest of the whole society. Okay. So 1, 2, 3. If you kind of join 1, 2, and 3, you will kind of get this logic which says that it will be more productive when they are set free. Right? If slave marble, if it is set free, it will join the open market system for sure. When people are slaves, they cannot join the open market system. And when they are joining the open market system, they will contribute to its competitiveness. Right? Otherwise, what will happen is that somebody might be producing something without efficiency and still be able to kind of sell it. If, however, the slave labor comes to society, they can also contribute to the production, and then competition will rise. And that is what happens in any free market. Okay, let's look at option B. Government should abolish slavery from a political point of view. This is an easy option to knock off. No mention is made of slavery having an impact on the political landscape, right? So, as I said, not enough information or no information. You know, just like the passage we saw, this is a bit too far-fetched. Getting rid of slavery will rid the society of all forms of self-interest. No, this is actually the opposite of what the passage is trying to say, right? The getting rid of slavery can only increase the quotient of self-interest, because the slave labor, as of now, they are not able to pursue their self-interests, right? When they will be freed is only when they will be able to pursue their self-interest. And as we have seen, that then it will fall into the 1, 2, 3 framework. This is also not right. Bondage has converted them into irresponsible citizens. Now, it is very, very logical to suggest that, you know, bondage is converted slave labor into irresponsible citizens. Probably they are not productive, but that does not mean that they are irresponsible. You know, there is no direct cause and effect relationship here. Okay, so this also goes out. They are exploited by rapacious landlords and greedy merchants. There is reason to believe that yes, they might be, but again, there is no direct relationship. But see, if slave labor were exploited, you know, that alone is not sufficient to turn them into an economic disadvantage. Okay. If you are an economic disadvantage, let us look at this option very closely. Okay. Let us say you have a factory. Okay. And you have slave labor here. Okay. Now they are being asked to work probably with their will, without their will. With their slave labor, we can assume that, you know, they are being made to work without their will. Okay. It is doing production. And then this product comes out into the market and it is sold, right? Now you might be exploiting the slave labor here, that, you know, they might be working probably 12 hours a day or 16 hours a day. What will happen? The output of the product will go up, right? So productivity will go up. Now, looking from an economic point of view, that is not a bad thing. The economic productivity is out, more product will be made, it will be sold in the market. You know, they will make a lot of money. They'll probably hire more slave labor, and, you know, the cycle continues. So you can say that they are exploited, but that exploitation is not making them an economic disadvantage. Okay. So they can be advantageous or disadvantage. So let us say if slave labor is there, it is only able to work for 4 hours. Yes, it's a disadvantage, big disadvantage, but we don't know, right? So there's nothing that directly connects economic disadvantage with exploitation. We know for sure that if they are free and if they participate in the open market here, either they buy or they sell, you know, then they can probably contribute to the better functioning of such a system, right? Right now, they might only be engaged in production. They are not getting paid well. They are not getting a lot of money. So they cannot go and purchase anything from the market. They can only contribute to the market. Right. So option E also gets knocked off, and option A becomes your final answer. This brings us to the end of this particular video. In all of these sessions, our focus is not on the number of questions that we can cover, and even your focus should not be on how many questions we have covered. Just that you should be able to deduce the kind of logic that we are trying to build, which should help you in the actual GMAT questions, because that is the ultimate aim, that you get to a 700 plus. So we might spend a lot of time on a particular question, and then drilling out the concepts, in drilling out the reasoning, in drilling out the tricks, in drilling out the different options that are very carefully placed to confuse you. But all of that is aimed to sharpen your skills in the actual GMAT exam. All right. So that brings us to the end of this session. Don't forget to subscribe, so that you will keep getting all the videos. There are more videos that we'll release as part of this series, so that we cover all the other sections like critical reasoning, sentence correction, even other passages of other kinds, and also a lot of tips and tricks of where you should read, what you should read, and the like. Right. Like this video, if you found it very useful, it will be a very big motivator for us. Also, it will help in reaching, or in expanding the reach of this video to other participants, or other people who might be preparing, so that we kind of build a community of people who are able to prepare and clear the exam really well. So I'll see you in the next installment of this series. Till then, take care and keep preparing.